All right, let's dive into a story that has, no exaggeration, shaped our world and inspired billions of people, the life of Jesus. We're going to walk through this incredible narrative from its cosmic beginnings all the way to its lasting legacy, hitting the key moments that made it one of the most powerful stories ever told. So let's get started.
So where does this all begin? Well, not on Earth, and not even with the beginning of time. The story opens with this epic idea of a divine creative force called the Word. This Word was there with God before anything else existed. And this Word, who the story later reveals is Jesus himself, is the very power through which everything was made.
Now, as the story goes, the world was created to be in perfect harmony. Humanity had this incredible, direct connection with its creator. But that connection was broken. Distrust and disobedience crept in, creating this deep separation, a fundamental problem that the rest of this entire story is trying to solve.
But even in that brokenness, there was a promise. For centuries, prophets had spoken about a figure who was coming, a Messiah, which basically means a savior. This person was going to be the answer, the one who could finally heal that broken relationship between humanity and God. So the world was waiting and watching.
So, after all those centuries of waiting, the promised Savior finally arrives. But his grand entrance into the world, well, let's just say it was nothing like anyone expected.
I mean, just look at this. The contrast is night and day. Everyone was expecting a king, so they were looking for a palace, a royal court, a display of power, right? But what they got was the exact opposite. A stable, a handful of shepherds as the first visitors, and a family with nothing. This whole idea of flipping expectations on their head, it's right at the heart of the story from the very first moment.
His early life was this mix of wonder and some very real danger. Right after he was born, his family had to flee to Egypt just to escape a jealous king. But you know what's even more surprising? What came next? Nearly 30 hidden years. He wasn't raised as a prince. He was a carpenter in a tiny, forgotten town called Nazareth. The world had no clue who was living right there among them. And then, after 3 decades of complete silence, Jesus steps onto the public stage. His ministry begins, and his message is simple, it's direct, and it is absolutely radical for its time.
This right here, this was his headline. It wasn't a complex philosophical lecture, it was an urgent announcement. He was basically saying, hey, listen up, God's kingdom, his way of doing things, is breaking into our world right here, right now. So it's time to change how you think and believe this incredible news.
And you know, it wasn't just talk. He backed it all up with these incredible actions. He performed miracles, but they weren't just for show. They were signs. Every time he healed someone or calmed a storm, it was like a little preview of what God's kingdom is all about. A world where sickness, chaos, and even death are finally put right.
And his teaching was just as radical as his miracles. In a world that runs on revenge and social climbing, he tells people to love their enemies, to forgive without limits, and to find true greatness not by being powerful, but by serving others. It was a completely upside-down way of looking at life.
Now, a message this revolutionary is definitely going to make some waves. While thousands of ordinary people were inspired, his teaching was a direct challenge to the people in power. By calling out hypocrisy and putting compassion above rigid religious rules, he made some very influential enemies. You could just feel the conflict building.
All of that growing conflict brings us to Jerusalem. The final week of Jesus' life is the dramatic peak of the whole story. This is where the tension between him and the authorities finally boils over.
And from here, things start moving fast, almost with a sense of tragic destiny. There's a final meal where he talks openly about being betrayed. Then he's arrested after one of his own followers turns him in. He's dragged through a sham trial, and even though he's innocent, he's condemned to the most brutal form of Roman execution, crucifixion.
And with those last words from the cross, it seemed like it was all over. The hope he had inspired, the movement he had built, it all seemed to die right there with him as he was buried in a borrowed tomb. His followers scattered, terrified and heartbroken.
But this is where the story takes its greatest turn. What looked like the ultimate defeat was, according to the narrative, actually the setup for the ultimate victory. Death was not going to get the final word.
3 days later, the reports started trickling in. The tomb was empty. An angel announced he had risen, and then he started to appear to people, not as a ghost, but physically alive. He showed up to his closest followers and eventually to hundreds of others. This event, the resurrection, is the absolute cornerstone of the faith that followed. It's presented as the ultimate proof that death itself had been conquered. So what's the fallout from this incredible story? Well, the impact of this one life, death, and resurrection wasn't contained to the first century. It rippled out, transforming the world in its wake.
I mean, we're talking about an impact that has been echoing for over 2,000 years. It's a story that has shaped cultures, sparked movements, and touched individual lives on every single continent. Its influence is truly historic.
And you can see that legacy in very real ways. His followers went from being terrified and hiding to being bold messengers. His teachings about compassion and human value planted the seeds for things we take for granted, like hospitals and universities. They fueled movements for justice and have fundamentally reshaped civilizations. And today, of course, billions of people still call themselves his followers.
So, when you boil it all down, what is this story really about? According to the source, it all comes down to love. A divine love that wasn't afraid to step into our messy, broken world. A love that was willing to endure suffering. A love powerful enough to defeat death itself. And then turn around and offer every single person an invitation to start over.
And that's the core of it. But here's the kicker. According to his followers, this story isn't actually finished. They believe he will one day return. And that leaves us with a huge, lingering question. If this story is still being written, what in the world happens next?